In today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we have some breaking bad news. Malik Beasley, is he now gone from the Detroit Pistons? Just a day ahead of free agency. How is that going to impact the Pistons? We'll break it all down. Today's episode, Locked On Pistons podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I am your host, Kook Hill. I've been covering the Detroit Pistons with the Locked On Network for the last 4 years. I'm a credentialed media member over the last 3 years. I appreciate all of you guys supporting the podcast, being an everydayers. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by FanDuel. This is just going to be great. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today's episode, we'll be talking about all things salary cap, all things you need to know heading into free agency. We have friend of the podcast, Kyle Metz, joining us to break it all down with us. He's a salary cap guru. We're lucky to have a Pistons salary cap guru within our community. Not every community has one, and Kyle's big time with that. So we'll break it all down with him. But sadly, we'll talk about, like I said, we'll talk about NAW coming up. We'll talk about their cap flexibility, what they're going to do over the cap, under the cap, all that kind of stuff. But we have to start with the biggest news of by far the offseason. Like maybe even I almost maybe not to the other rest of the NBA fan base, but in the Pistons fan base, this is bigger than even the championship. What just happened? So today, Shams Charania, let's just get into it. He reported, and we'll let Kyle talk in a minute, but I have to give this eulogy. But Malik Beasley, all jokes aside, is Shams Charania reported that he is being investigated by the U.S. District Attorney's Office for gambling during the NBA season on specifically prop bets during the 2023-2024 season. And without diving too far into it, really, I don't really want to get too deep into that. All you need to know based off that is if he is found guilty of doing this, his NBA career immediately is in jeopardy. If you look at Jonte Porter, his career, done. Terry Rozier is being investigated. It's a little different because Terry Rozier is under contract, so they just let him keep playing. Beasley is an upcoming free agent just in 24 hours from now. If he is found guilty, his career is very much in jeopardy at all. And this is one day before the Pistons enter free agency, where he was expected to be offered a 3-year, $42 million contract, a full MLE. And now with that news, there's no way, not just the Pistons, but any team is going to be touching a player or giving out any kind of money guarantee to a player that just may be gone completely in 2 months. Not only just because of the money you'd commit, but because of the resources you would then lose to improve your team in other ways if you give it to someone who may just be gone in a month. So the Pistons aren't going to touch him until this investigation is over. No NBA team is going to touch him until the investigation is over and finds him, hopefully innocent, what Pistons fans would love to hear. But as of right now, just an absolutely huge blow out of nowhere. Just a huge blow out of nowhere that Malik Beasley, who hit over 300 threes this past year, for the time being, it's just gone indefinitely. Like you can't touch him. You can't sign him. You can't re-sign him. It's just over with, which is, it's huge. It's bad. It's not great at all. And we're not going to talk about whether he's innocent or guilty, because that doesn't really matter. Whether he's innocent or guilty doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that the investigation is going on. So now that forces everyone to just stay away from him. So no matter whether he's innocent or guilty in a month, 2 months, whatever the investigation is over, that has no impact on what the Pistons are now going to have to do, which is pivot away from Beasley. So, Kyle, if you have any thoughts that you just want to say on the whole situation, the terrible news that just dropped before we get into the whole impact on the salary cap, go ahead.
Yeah, I remember someone tweeting about this after I think Rozier stuff came out, and there is some vague tweets about Beasley being next, and that we were all collectively holding our breath at that point as it was. And so this makes sense with some of the rumors about some of the other free agents, and we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes, but it kind of makes sense to some of that, the news that you're seeing. But I have to believe that the organization already knew about this to some degree. Even the way the language was, they were in discussions for that 3 years, $14 million. Like the Pistons could have already signed him to that, like, and offered it to him. So like clearly there was hey, we're comfortable with this framework, maybe depending on how this falls out, and so I don't think they're surprised by this, or at least they're not just finding out about it when Shams tweeted it. So that's my one thing. I saw that kind of going off on Pistons Twitter today. The other thing I would say is, I think there's room here to, because it's ongoing, and even because of some of the ways it was like the agent came out and said he's doing his job, right, to protect his agent. Or maybe it was the lawyer that came out and said this, but I could see a world in where the Pistons decide, hey, let's give him $5 million. We have his non-bird rights. We can sign him up to $7 million. Another 1-year deal. Let's keep him on the roster. Let's, maybe we don't play him just in case things like, until the investigation is over, but maybe, and just in case his NBA career isn't over and he gets banned for life, like, let's get him under contract. Let's use that 15th roster spot to keep him in-house. We can, if it goes well, we then get his early bird rights next summer, which lets us sign him to like $15 million contract, which puts him, like you can kind of go the same route, and it's actually easier to re-sign him long-term. Again, should they do that with all this stuff? Maybe not, but I could see a world in which if they're already interested and they probably already had an inkling this could be a thing, maybe they go that route later into the offseason if they choose not to go to the cap room route, which we'll talk about. But that's my other, maybe they do this. We'll see what happens, but they might be able to afford to do that.
Yeah, I feel like that at the very, like, because the Pistons were asked to give a comment, and they said, no, we don't have anything to, like, just no comment. They said nothing. What I feel like is maybe the Pistons had like an inkling of, like, knowing that maybe there's some whispers like, hey, did you hear that maybe they're looking at this, to where they maybe heard, okay, there's some whispers about this, so let's just talk about it. I don't feel like they expected it to be dropped today, like investigations actually happening. Like, I don't think they expected the bomb of, yeah, it's not just whispers, we're full on investigating, he might be gone. I don't know if they were but I do agree with you. They had to have at least heard like whispers of, hey, sounds like maybe there was something going on, like something like that. They have to know something.
Right.
But like you mentioned, that was something I was going to mention as well, is that I don't know if they do it now, but I do agree with you that maybe in like 2 months, if the investigation is over and, hopefully he's innocent for Pistons fans' sake, Pistons are like, okay, we'll bring you back in on this 1-year deal because now we've already used our assets. We'll bring you back in the 1-year deal, and we'll handle you handsomely next offseason. And we'll give you that long-term contract then, because by then everyone's cap space is gone. Everyone, no one has, no one's going to, the point is here, no one's going to invest any kind of commitment into a guy they think might be gone completely from the NBA in a month from now. So the best case scenario for Beasley is that when this investigation is over, he's innocent, and then he can sign a 1-year contract with somebody and then get paid again, long-term next offseason. But,
Well, just be clear, so I don't get jumped in the comments or on Twitter. I wasn't saying they should give him $7 million.
No, yeah, right.
They should, if they're going to do that, they give him a minimum to keep his rights so that next year they can pay him off the NBA average. And so that costs them basically nothing, because then if they sign him to a minimum, then it comes out that he's done. They just cut him. Doesn't hurt him at all. But you do that last after you've done all your other moves. So they could even do it before the investigation resolves if they're just trying to, keep options open and to put a show of like loyalty to him. Hey, look, we're going to take care of you while you figure this out. Like, we're going to, until it's proven innocent. Like, they could decide to stand by him in that sense, give him a minimum, keep him under, keep his rights. I don't know that they'll do that, but they could. So that's all I'm saying.
Right. Yeah, I completely understand. And I read another thing, and like I said, I really don't want to have to go too far into this, but like I cover the team and we kind of have to, like, we don't really have a choice but to like address it. I was just reading something earlier that they according to the report, they have a very specific time of when they think it happened, a very specific prop bet in which it happened at. Like it, and another person, I saw another reporter suggest that usually these kind of things, they don't drop this kind of bombshell if we're going for an investigation unless they feel like they really have something. So it's tough.
Not looking good. Yeah, not looking good. Yeah,
it's really tough. And we're just talking about the cap situation. Like, we haven't even talked about, like, obviously his impact on the floor. This is a team, he activated prime Klay Thompson this past year. It was one of the best shooting seasons we've ever seen. For a team that struggled in the half-court offense, he was literally their life raft for the majority of the year. For this half-court offense, he was the one movement shooter. We're about to talk about Nikeil Alexander-Walker, maybe Santi Aldama, whoever. But all of that was with the idea of Malik's still going to be here. You're adding that to Malik, not, oh, now Malik's gone and now you have to get this. Not only do they have to just improve the team, I feel like now they're going to have to find someone that can replicate at least the type of threes he takes, the movement shooting. And it's just really I'm low key happy that it at least happened the day before free agency instead of like 2 days after you give him the contract and now bomb drops and it's like, oh well,
Right.
like now what? So it's, I mean, I guess that's at least one positive way to look at it, but this is really tough for Pistons fans. Malik was fantastic for them. This one's going to be tough. But Kyle, unless you have anything else you want to chip in, we can go to the ad and then we'll come back and talk about one day ahead of free agency what the Pistons going to do.
Yep.
All right, and Nikeil Alexander-Walker seems like he's at the top of the Pistons wish list. Santi Aldama, can they get him from Memphis? Now with Malik Beasley potentially just being gone, what way do they go? Do they go over the cap? Do they go under the cap? What's the most flexible way for the Pistons to operate here? Now, we'll talk about all of that coming up. And man, this one right here is going to be great. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights or golf on the green or high-stakes soccer action or maybe some prop bets, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get on the game with your friends or getting sunburnt at the beach. I've been using FanDuel, sadly, for the last few years since it became legal in Michigan. It's absolutely fun to use. I love it. It's a lot of fun, obviously. Super self-explanatory, super easy to use, but most importantly, super fun to use. Maybe a little too fun to use, but whether I'm placing a same game parlay or watching a bet ride into the 9th inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Again, if you're new to FanDuel, just place $5, and if your first bet wins, you'll get $150 in bonus bets. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started, unless you are a professional athlete. If you are a professional athlete, stay away. But if you are not, and you're like me, FanDuel's a lot of fun. I love it. I use it all the time. You guys should too. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started with FanDuel. That was probably, one of my not favorite ad breaks ever. Appreciate
potentially top five ad read for you in your career for sure.
I appreciate all of you guys making Locked On Pistons your first listen every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. We're less than 20 subs away from 11,000 subscribers. So hit the subscribe button over there if you haven't already. I appreciate all of you guys. Or leave us a 5-star review. My goodness, on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. But moving on from the Beasley news, or really not really moving on from the Beasley news, I guess the first thing we'll address is, Kyle, now that this, it sounded like it felt like the Pistons were going to operate as an over the cap team because they were going to have the cap holds on Malik, be able to give him that MOE, non-taxpayer MOE. They'll be able to potentially re-sign Dennis Schroeder, even though it sounded like he's going to Sacramento now with Beasley and everything that's going on. And it sounds like the Pistons are ready. And Schroeder put out some interesting Instagram posts. And then we got an interesting report from Stein that makes it sound like the Pistons are wanting to give some of these backup point guard minutes to Ivey anyway. So they're okay with letting him. So it just seems like Schroeder's also gone. Should the Pistons operate over the cap? Should they try to create cap space? What's the positives and negatives to both now at this point? If there's even a negative to going under the cap now.
Yeah, so it definitely, all this new stuff definitely makes it a lot more 50-50 in my mind. I know that a lot of the conversation up to this point with a lot of the national guys has been, oh, it could be either way. Like they could go this way, they could go this way. I've always felt like it was a no-brainer to stay over the cap if you're really going to maximize what you're trying to do. And having, because frankly, we've gone over this before, but right now they can only really make $16.9 million in cap room by waiving and renouncing everyone, including Beasley. That's the starting number. You can maybe get close to 25 if you send out Tech in a salary dump. The thing for fans,
and we did get a report. Just want to back you up here. We did get a report from Mike Scotto today that apparently the Pistons are trying to dump Tech's contract, according to him. So that sounds like that may be something they're trying to do. But go ahead. Just wanted to back you up.
Right. And, yeah. And the thing people need to remember though with that is there are like incomplete roster charges, which is almost $2 million. So really, by dumping Tech, you're only making like $6.5 million, maybe. So like it would be much more versus if you trade him outright, you can bring back a $16 million player in. So by keeping him and trading him in a single deal, you can create $8 million more in spending power versus only creating $6 million in cap room. So that's where I'm wondering again, I'm not an insider, but if it were me, I think there's a lot of mechanisms where they can stay over the cap and create just as much spending power as getting under the cap and trying to bring guys in with cap room. That being said, there are benefits to both, and it just depends on who they're going after. That's kind of how I would say it before we get into specifics. So just as you're, playing around with salary dumps and things, remember every time you get rid of a player, you have to subtract their salary by like $2 million functionally, if it's not in the deal you're bringing the player in, until they're over 12 roster spots, and then you're good. But that's where it comes in.
All right, so let's go ahead and you say it depends who they want to go after. Well, let's go ahead and segue into that. According to multiple reports from Mark Stein, Jake Fisher, I believe Scotto also reported this. There's a lot of reporting going on that Nikeil Alexander-Walker is the Pistons' top target. It's who they're wanting to go after. It's the top guy they're pivoting towards. Like you mentioned earlier, maybe the Pistons did know about this beforehand, and that's why it was reports early on, even a few days ago, that Nikeil was their top target. Maybe that was the case. Who knows? But that seems all the reporting is pointing towards he's their top target. And with the Timberwolves now extending Julius Randle and Naz Reid before free agency, he's basically gone from Minnesota, it sounds like. And it's Atlanta and Detroit, according to reports. So I guess the first question is, if they are to go after Nikeil Alexander-Walker, and it sounds like it's probably going to take more than just the mid-level exception, what do you think is the best way to go about trying to acquire him?
Yeah, and the simplest way, I'll put it this, the simplest way is to go the cap room route and just create the space for it if he needs more than the mid-level. I think the more elegant solution is trading someone like Tech. You can get up to about 16.8 million. We've talked about this before for Aldama. If you sign in trades, you send Tech out to a third team, and then you take in Nikeil Alexander-Walker, and you can give him like a 4-year, $72 million contract. The first year is 16.8, but I think that's around 18 million or something per year. So I think that's a really elegant solution because it keeps your non-taxpayer available. It keeps some other avenues open, and you don't have to renounce anybody to do that. And then the trick with that is you have to send Tech to a third team basically, or hard caps the Minnesota Timberwolves at the second apron, which they may not want to do. And so that's where that gets tricky.
What would be the benefit to the third team? So, like, do you send a second with Tech to that third team to help facilitate the deal? Is that how that would work?
Yeah, it'd be the equivalent of a salary dump. So yeah, maybe you send a second or two. It depends on how bad you want Nikeil Alexander-Walker, right? Like if it's like we really want him and this is the deal, it needs to get done. I mean, we saw teams getting a first round pick this year for salary dump for the first time in a long time. So that just tells you how desperate people are to get out of that second apron. And so you'd have to probably pay up for that. But Tech isn't a terrible player either. I think teams will like him. He just had a bad year and they're going to use that against. So the Pistons have no leverage really. But when a push comes to shove, like someone's probably going to want a large motion shooter that can sometimes put the ball on the floor, even if he didn't look good last year. Like some tanking team is going to be like, he can fill minutes for us, or a playoff team. He can be our 12th guy off the bench, whatever. So like he's an expiring. It shouldn't cost too much. But that's, I think, my favorite solution. But again, that requires other teams to be involved. And since there is a lot of movement, that cap room to dump people is going to dry up quick. So there might be premiums you're paying on that.
All right, so we have questions. I let everybody know that we were recording ahead of free agency today, so everyone could get their questions. And so I do have questions here from people asking, but I wanted to stay on this topic. We'll spend the whole third segment, I promise, answering all of your guys' questions you guys sent in. But the next part of this is I want to mention is we've heard the Pistons also interested in Asante Aldama. We've heard them maybe interested in Jake LaRavia, even though Jake LaRavia would cost way less than, Aldama. I don't think that's, too crazy to have to worry about. And like we mentioned, with Beasley, it felt like to me they were wanting to add Nikeil to Beasley with this team, and then Ivey take some of the backup point guard minutes. Now with Beasley gone, they're going to have to address, I feel like, multiple spots, unless they truly are just so high in Chaz Lanier, where they're like, oh, he'll just come in and he'll take some of those spots, which I don't think is the case. But maybe in some crazy world they're that high on him. I guess it's not impossible. with them now needing a movement shooter and still needing a backup four, but also seemingly going all in on Nikeil Alexander-Walker, if the Pistons were to sign him to, or sign and trade him, or I'll let you go and pick whichever route, but let's just say his contract's around $18-19 million that he comes back to. Do the Pistons have any flexibility still? Is there any way for them to still go after Asante Aldama in free agency? Is there any way for them to go after maybe a Duncan Robinson who just declined his option with Miami? Like, if they do go after Nikeil Alexander-Walker and it costs more than the MLE, is that basically the move? Is that it? Are they stuck, or can they still make moves?
Well, yeah, they would still have the non-taxpayer MLE. So if they do that, and another option we talked about maybe on a Twitter space a couple days ago was Dennis Schroeder going to the Kings. Can you work that into a deal where you sign and trade Schroeder, so then you can immediately pull Alexander-Walker up to $22.8 million in that scenario? If Schroeder gets their MLE to the Kings, that wins everybody. They get their player. The Pistons get Nikeil Alexander-Walker without using their exception. You pay Kings a second and you pay Mini a second just to get it done. And now you have the mid-level still to use. And then you still have tech to use if you want to go get Aldama at $17 million a year. That same thing, that 4 year, $72 million. So there's lots of flexibility. The Pistons have way more than I think people realize if they stay over the cap. There's a lot of mechanisms. Now they're complex and they require other teams, and so they may not all work. Quite frankly, they might be able to get one of those things to happen, but they technically have the mechanisms to do that, especially if Nikeil Alexander-Walker is a sign and trade scenario where they're dumping somebody else, because then they can use that non-taxpayer to bring in Duncan Robinson, who is exactly one of the people that I'm not ever high on him, but again, you need a movement shooter. That's what he does. And so the question is, do you have room for Ivey, NAW, Duncan Robinson, and Cade? And then, Sasser is just kind of your fifth guard at that point. Your THJ is probably gone at that point. But they can also use THJ in a sign and trade and bring in a $27 million player. So if Anthony Simons scratches your itch, right, they can technically do a swap there with the Celtics or send him to Atlanta into their trade exception. Lots of flexibility. And I know we're tight on time. We want to get to questions, so I can't go through all those, but maybe we'll hit some of the questions. But yeah, so anyone who's worried about that, there's plenty of options. And I still think they have more. I think they have more flexibility above the cap. The one thing I'll say is if they go under the cap, they still have the room exception for $8 million. And so that's another route. If they, like a LaRavia would fit perfectly in that room exception. So if they go the cap room, get Nikeil Alexander-Walker with the cap room, and then they use the room exception on LaRavia and they fill the rest in with minimums. So so again, you can see they have a lot more flexibility over the cap if they're able to get teams to play ball.
Right. So I was just about to say, it seems like they definitely have more flexibility over the cap to operate that way. I hope that they're able to get some sign and trades done then. That sounds like the best case scenario for them. And they do have a lot of seconds too. There is 1 year where they have I don't have it. I should have pulled it up, but there's 1 year specifically where they just have multiple seconds. So they have second rounders to play with here to make stuff happen. I don't envy Trajan and Michael Blackstone at all right now. This was not a scenario I have to believe they thought was actually going to drop the day before free agency. And it's crazy. You hope that they did know about this before. Because I can only imagine having it drop the day before free agency and being like, oh my God, scratch everything. We have to figure out now a game plan of how we're going to attack this now. This is now, I feel so bad for Trajan. This is back-to-back off seasons now where he's probably going to feel rushed. I know last year I was told many times that he felt kind of rushed. New coach, new front office, free agency, draft, all happened real late. He thinks this year he finally has an easy offseason, and then the day before free agency, we have this drop. So it's like, I don't envy him. I kind of feel bad for him. But coming up, we'll answer all of your guys' questions that you guys sent in for Kyle to answer, concerning, I should say, the salary cap and free agency that starts Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time, I believe. We'll talk about all of those questions, answer all of them coming up. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first list of every single day. We are free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, Kyle, let's get into some of these questions and get some answers here. So this one's from Honest Ron Holland fan. says, if Schroeder leaves and Beasley leaves and we place them with NAW and Aldama, would you consider that a roster improvement? Would it be too hard to do it? Is it feasible to do so?
Well, we hit the second part of that already. It's pretty feasible. And they have a lot of second round picks, like we said, just to grease the skids on any deal. They've got at least 3 second round picks in 27, 28, and 29. So they've got lots of flexibility there. Yeah, if they lose Schroeder and Beasley, and he said NAW and Aldama, I mean, yeah, I think it's definitely at least even. I still think you're missing a volume shooter in that scenario, and I think if that's the moves, I'm bringing THJ back for something.
I was just going to say that I think that's on the board now.
Right, and that's where staying over the cap again, you get to keep all those cap holds. So as long as THJ wants to come back, like you could pay him. This is not answering the question, but I know we've talked about this before. I would give him basically a 1-year deal at that point, up to whatever would get you just below the tax line, so that you can have that as salary matching for, let's say, if Devin Booker says, yeah, I'm done with these kids, get me out of here. Then you don't have to trade Tobias to go get him. You have another $24 million-ish contract that's an expiring that you can send out. THJ is going to sign that every day because he's getting paid, for 1 year. It's the old JJ Redick thing that the Sixers did. So, or New Orleans, I forget who it was. Sorry. But anyway, so yes, it's definitely possible. I think they would need to make one more move, either keep THJ or go get Duncan Robinson, something like that.
Yeah, my answer would be for the roster improvement. The argument that you would be making here is that having a backup 4 and a point of attack defender with Nikeil Alexander-Walker would offset the drop off you'd get from the movement shooter. Now, you still would theoretically want to go get a movement shooter, but the argument there would be, okay, we have consistent 48 minutes of good foreplay now at the 4 position. You got Nikeil Alexander-Walker at the point of attack defensively. You improve the defense in the guard room. That will offset a little bit of the movement shooting that you lose with Beasley. That would be the argument. I think like you said, I think they still would have to go find some kind of movement shooter, or at least replicate the type of shots Beasley takes, so you can have that same kind of gravity and run that same kind of offense. This question is from Tony. He says, if we use up our cap space to sign players that are not our own free agents, do we still get to use the biannual exception?
No. So the biannual exception is the only for over the cap teams, which is another mechanism that I didn't even talk about. They can go get a backup point guard for $5 million using the biannual, and that you can do a 2-year contract with 5% raises. And so that's a pretty good deal. So let's say Tyus Jones looks at the market and says, you know what, maybe I'm not going to get starting money, but I can come in and now I don't think he'll want that because they're still clearly wanting to get Ivey some touches and Asar some touches, which is why I don't think they're going to sign a backup like they didn't last summer, because they want that ball handling to be there, but they have another $5 million if they're over the cap to get somebody, but that's only if you're over the cap. Once you've used any cap room, you lose access to that. The only exception you have at that point is the room exception, even if you end up over the cap afterwards.
All right, next question is from Motown. What type of contract do we need to offer Nikeil Alexander-Walker to keep him away from being an Atlanta Hawk? And I want to add on to this question. Atlanta has that $25 million trade exception, don't they? So couldn't they theoretically could probably offer him the most, right? They could just sign and trade that exception over. Would that be how it works if they really wanted Nikeil like that?
Yeah, and I think someone asked me on Twitter earlier today too. So technically the Pistons can get to the same, unless the Hawks really, really want to pay him $25 million and the Pistons don't. Like technically the Pistons can get up to $27 million if they do the sign and trade with THJ and dump him somewhere else. Now that will be very costly for them and potentially hard to do because THJ has to agree on the destination. The team getting him has to agree to it, and Nikeil has to agree to it. So that's harder than the Hawks just saying, yeah, we want you, pay him whatever, send him here. Like it's easier for Atlanta to do that, but technically the Pistons can pay them the same. So it just comes down to where does Nikeil want to be and who wants to pay him the most. I think that's what it comes down to. And then maybe it's role, right? If it's Atlanta says you can start, and the Pistons are like, you can kind of be our sixth man, or you know what I mean? Like what's going to happen there? Like, are you going to pay him almost $20 million to come off the bench? Like, is Ivey cool with coming off the bench? That starts to you start to get into some weirdness there. So Atlanta might be a more attractive situation. But then you have Dyson Daniels there too. So it's hard to say what Nikeil wants. I know Trajan was high on him. I think he was the one that pushed a trade for him when he was in New Orleans. So there is some ties there that might work in the Pistons' favor. So from a money standpoint, they can technically get there. It's just easier for Atlanta to do it. How much they have to pay him, I don't know what that number is, but I can't imagine more than $20 million a year is what it will take. I think if you're in the 18 to 19 range and you're offering him 25 to 30 minutes in a major role, even if it's not starting, I think that might get it done.
Yeah, I think I agree. And also, two things real quickly. One, Trajan did have like a full interview that I remember it was just put on Twitter today. A full interview where he's just talking nothing but love about Nikeil Alexander-Walker, about how much he likes him. It was when he was with New Orleans still. So he is a fan of Nikeil. So it makes sense. They must have some ties. The second question here, or the second thing I want to say, ties into the next question that we have. This one's from Richard. He said, after Jabari Smith just signed the 5-year, $122 million extension, how do you believe this could impact J.I. and J.D.'s extension? My question is the exact same thing. Jabari, you just signed that extension literally, I think like an hour and a half ago before we started recording. Jabari Smith of the Houston Rockets. I believe it's around 25 million annually for him. That's someone that was in the same draft class. This is the same draft class as J.I. and J.D. So how do you think that could impact the Pistons in extension talks?
It's probably the floor, right? Because I don't know that you could have, it'd be hard to argue that he's been better than those guys. But he's on a better team, so his role's limited. So like they could kind of maybe argue that. But I think both of those guys that you're going to say at the very minimum, and it's easy for JD more. I think it affects JD more than it does Ivey, because it's just totally different positions. But it's definitely the floor for those guys. Like they're not going to accept less than 24 million annual value at this point. But I already didn't expect them to accept that. Like I always thought that it was going to be closer to between 25 and 27 for Duren, based on the percentage of the cap and some other guys that have signed in the past. But yeah, I think that definitely starts the floor for the market.
Yeah, I agree. Before this, I really did not want to pay. Of my opinion, I did not really want to pay either of them over 25 million. But now with Jabari, who, like you said, J.I. and J.D. will both try and maybe be able to make an argument that they've just been better than Jabari to this point, and he just got paid this. Again, like you mentioned, the Pistons could probably make the argument that, yeah, but he's in a smaller role for a team that just won the second seed. If we were in that kind of position, maybe your guys' role would be also limited, a little bit more limited. You guys want to have the same numbers, whatever. Negotiations, whatever. But for him to be in the exact same draft class and sign for this, J.I. and J.D. especially, I think I agree with you. I think it impacts J.D. the most because he is a big man. They don't play the same positions, but they're closer here. And J.D. just played for a team that won playoff games in the East. I think that he will have an argument for this. I think I agree with you now that this would definitely be the floor, $25 million for either of them. The last question this is the question I have. We'll wrap it up here. What do you think happens? We are, I think, what is it? So that's 3 hours, 12 hours, 15. What are we, like 21 hours, 20 hours away from free agency starting?
Yeah, 20 and a half.
20 and a half hours away. What do you foresee? What do you think is going to happen here for the Pistons?
Oh man,
we won't hold you to it. Yes, we absolutely.
I know, of course. What do I think is going to happen? I can tell you what I think should happen, but I think what's going to happen is they're gonna probably move for Nikeil Alexander-Walker. I think they're gonna make a push for him. I hope it's not by going under the cap, because that will be it'll be that much harder to build out the team. But knowing how costly it is, he talked about how costly it was to try to trade up, how costly it might be to try to dump salary. That would include those sign-in trades. So I think the problem that I'm having is, in the years past, the Pistons have all these options and mechanisms and they never use them. We sit here and we talk all summer about, oh, they can do this and they can do that. And cap nerds like me get excited and they just end up, doing the bare minimum. So I'm a little gun shy to say they'll actually use them, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say Michael Blackstone worked his creativity and at least swing Schroeder going to the Kings into a sign and trade for Nikeil Alexander-Walker, and getting him close to $20 million a year. And then at that point, I think there's some smoke on Aldama, but I think Aldama will probably end up staying with Memphis when push comes to shove, or we'll end up somewhere else. Because I don't believe that the Pistons will actually be able to pull off 2 sign and trades and do all that fun stuff. And then they probably bring back THJ, and there'll be probably some that we aren't expecting that we'll bring in, but it probably won't be a huge name. And then they'll keep their flexibility for next year like they want to. And then I hope they one year overpay THJ if that's the route they go, so they have more trade deadline flexibility.
All right. I lied. That's not my last question. You just brought something else. This is an easy one. With everything that happened with Beasley, do you think they should consider bringing back Schroeder, or do you feel like the bridges might be burned already? We did get the Instagram stories or lives, whatever it was, from Schroeder, where he sounded like, I wanted to come back, but they're not waiting for me, blah, blah. And then we got the report from Stein that says that the Pistons have been bracing for this because they want Ivey to take up some of those backup point guard minutes. They're kind of okay with him leaving. With Beasley now out, do you think that's something that could happen, or do you feel like that, maybe bridges are burnt here?
I read that when I listened to the video and didn't just read the text on it. I heard it. The way it sounded to me was like, I want to be there. I'm waiting on them to give me a contract. Like, he's like, they're not waiting on me. I'm waiting on them. That's how I heard it. Again, the bridge might be burned. If Sacramento's offering him more, that's probably where he's going. But I think if they came to the table and said, hey, yeah, we want you, we'll pay you $12 million to be our backup. Like, I don't think he's sweating that. I think that's how I read it was, I'm waiting for them to give me a contract because I want to be here. And if I don't come back, it's because they didn't give it to me in time and I had to take my money when I could. So that's kind of how I read it. Rather than I want to shop around and they're not going to wait for me to do that. That's kind of how I heard it. So I don't know if it matters. I don't think that they will, quite frankly, because they went into last season with this same kind of like, we want to see what we have in these ball handlers, so let's give them a shot. They can always go back out again at the deadline and find someone, or they can, get later in a free agency and find a backup point guard with one of the exceptions. So we'll see. Trajan said he wanted to bring back a couple of the vets. I think he probably included Beasley in that and maybe THJ, but maybe not. So I'm really interested to see what he's going to do. I hope it's creative and fun, so we actually have more to talk about and not just let's run it back. But
last run it back fan club wins. That is what it is. All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Kyle, for coming on. Go ahead and let everybody know they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, it's at Kyle Metz 23 on X and sometimes Blue Sky. And then tomorrow I'm hosting with Pistons Jack. We're doing a live stream for the free agency starting at 6 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to follow free agency along with us, that's what I'll be doing that tomorrow. So come pull up, have fun. We don't take ourselves too seriously, but we're gonna react to everything, and hopefully we get to react to a Lauri Markkanen trade to the Pistons or Trey Murphy, whatever.
That would be some crazy fun for sure. But appreciate you, man, again, for coming on, giving us some insight before free agency. I appreciate all of you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day, being everydayers. I appreciate all of you guys. Hit that subscribe button at the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Free agency starts tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Going to be interesting. Until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace out, everybody.